Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Chasing Psychological Safety. This week, as you've seen in the article yesterday, we want to talk to you about some of the gains we've made during this period. It's difficult to think that way because there's so much to be upset about, obviously, and there's so much loss we've all gone through and so much change, and most of it hasn't been horribly pleasant. With that said, there have been some things that we have learned, all of us, and if we put them together, we might be able to get the good out of it. One of the things we have done at People Not Tech during this period has been, I'm sure you know, if you've ever seen one of our videos or read any of our articles, was put out a COVID offer as soon as this thing hit us, where we have allowed teams to get on the software for free. And also we have prepared something called a Stay Connected pack, which had exclusively questions that had to do with the idea of working remotely for those of you that were in a new reality. So we've put that out, as I said, for free. And what has happened is we had a good 20-something, 30 teams at the last count that have come to us during this period solely through this offer. And we have seen a number of things. The very first thing to talk to you about is there were no real patterns, in the sense that despite the fact that these teams were from very different industries and they were of very different sizes, what we've seen in common was more important and heavier than what we've seen separated them. There have been a couple of patterns and a couple of scenarios that are in common for most of us, and I think you resonate with some of them. So we wanted to bring you some examples today so that you too realize that whatever you're dealing with, whether it's new from here on or you've seen it happen already, has happened to others as well. This is in common. The need for focusing on the team, the need for focusing on psychological safety, and the need for doing the people work is not personal to any type of team, to any type of industry, and any size or any situation. So far, we've seen a couple of things, and I'll let Ffion take over for one of these examples, if you liked.
Brilliant. So one of the standout examples that we've worked with in the last 6 months is something that we've both seen over the course of our careers, many times, but it really was a great example, if great is the right word, of a team that needed to focus on psychological safety and for whom it was incredibly beneficial to focus on psychological safety. So this is the scenario where a team has had a new leader, so same team, new leader. The previous leader exhibited behaviours that were not psychologically safe. So that's the politic way of saying that leader was potentially bullying, but certainly didn't create an environment that was safe and allowed people to speak up. So that person had led with behaviours that were negative. Perhaps there was the blame game being played. Perhaps that person was taking credit for other people's work. There were a variety of behaviours, all of which we've seen before in the workplace, but all of which really clearly undermine psychological safety in a team. Then that team has got a new leader, and that person is new to the team. They've never worked with that person before, and as a result of being beaten and bruised from working with the previous leader, that team are then struggling to build that trust with that new leader in place. And that person is able to see that working on psychological safety is a really straight to the solution way of rebuilding trust with that team at a group level, and getting them to the place where they can be trusting, vulnerable, and work their way towards being a happier, healthier, more productive environment. So that's one really standout example of a team that we've worked with in the last 6 months who would really benefit from, who were and did really benefit from psychological safety.
Yes, that was one of the common ones. Another really common theme was obviously restructuring. And over this period, we have had multiple organizations who have had to let go of people, multiple organizations who have had to furlough some and keep some others working, and obviously even more organizations that have had to make reshuffles, change the structure of the team and so on, which meant that many times, even within the same departments, the same type of work, you'd have teams at various levels of coming together. So depending on the type of team dynamic theory you subscribe to, you'll be able to see the phases that a team goes through as they come together. And the most common one is obviously the popularized one, in which they form together, then they storm together, they norm, and then ideally they perform together as well. So if you do subscribe to that particular pattern, what we've seen in this period over COVID has been a lot of impromptu forming that people were not prepared for, that hasn't been communicated maybe quite as clearly and as strongly as it would have been in times of peace, and which meant that it put people into these, it combined the patterns, if you wish, and it made the delimitation between the phases quite impermeable, if you wish. And what happened is some parts of the team were forming and some others were already storming and on their way to, which by the way is that a moment when they start to clash, they start to challenge each other, they figure out where exactly they are in the process. So some parts of the team were there, some other parts were somewhere else, which meant that having these different dynamics within a handful of people has made it really difficult for them to come together to a degree. So when there were teams who were in the middle of a completely organization process where the new people were coming in, some people were going out, there was this generalized fear of who's going to even be there and working by the time COVID left us. That made things a lot harder, and we have had teams that have relied on our software to make sure that they can take the pulse of this very fast dynamic that was changing, and to make sure that they see how that affects various components of psychological safety. So we've seen a lot of that pattern as well.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the really common, or should we say standout example again, was teams rebuilding out of a toxic culture. So teams where they've had a leader has inherited a team, or some people have worked their way into a team, and they have turned out to have toxic behaviors based on their own personalities, insecurities, and potentially the culture of the organization, and perhaps some things that have happened in the organization as well that they haven't been able to let go of, and the behaviors are as a result of that. There are lots of reasons why a toxic culture or certain toxic individuals become that way in a team. But when you're trying to rebuild out of that team, so the leader and the people around the team have realized that a person may have to leave the team, and naturally that has happened, the team again is left low on confidence, low on connectedness, low on trust, and that has to be rebuilt. And it can be really challenging because often some very difficult things have been said, and some very difficult situations have occurred, and a team can feel confused in working their way out of that. And having this ability to answer questions about psychological safety, understand psychological safety, understand impression management, and work through that as a team bubble is a really healthy way to work your way out of rebuilding out of a toxic culture. And we've seen that in a couple of different scenarios. So in large organizations, that happens in team bubbles in various different contexts, and we've also seen it in growth organizations. So say a small to medium sized enterprise has grown a team when everything was very small and very trusting, and a particular kind of behavior could be tolerated. As that organization has grown, that's not been able to be possible, and it's become more and more obvious that that's a problem, and then the team has had to lose those individuals. But of course they're trying to build, and they need to build trust as they go on that growth journey, and psychological safety has been a really useful tool for some of those teams as well.
And I think one thing to wrap up with, obviously I'll remind everyone that if you're watching this anytime in the last week of August, there are still a couple more days to get your teams on the software and just have them look at these separate components. I'll say them again. We are measuring whether a team is flexible, whether they are resilient, whether they are learning together, what their engagement is like. Obviously, we're checking their courage and how willing they are to speak up. And we do that by measuring both their behaviors and what they say. And we also look at their negative behaviors, such as impression management. We do that in a live dashboard. You're going to be able to together come up with ideas as to what to do to better your bubble. And we will say that even the teams that have only started and dropped it, the teams that have made the most use of it, so anywhere from those that have started and haven't gotten very far because of multiple reasons, all the way to those that are using it daily, the improvement we've seen comes from the fact that people now understand the topic of team is important, the well-being of their dynamic is front of mind, and there are things they can do themselves to affect it. So simply starting to get your hands dirty and look at psychological safety as something that you can and should affect, and your people work as something that you can and should put first, should make a big difference in your practice. So with the hope that from here on we can look at the good things that have come out of the COVID period, the move to remote work, ideally hybrid sometime soon, the heavier conversations that have happened around really big topics, and with the hope that we can preserve that and transform that into a day-to-day bettering of teams and their lives and dynamics. We'll talk to you next week, and we'll come up with a couple of the things that you could be doing that are a lot more practical from then on. So talk to you then. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. See you. Bye.